Chapter 1. It is given to few people in this world to disappear twice. But as he had succeeded once, the man known as James Cattleman was about to make his second attempt. If he did not succeed this time, he would never know it, for he would be dead. When a man has but a few months to live, he can, if he so wills, choose the manner of his going, and Cattleman had made such a choice. He was now on his way to a place of which he alone knew, and there he would die. He would die as he had lived, alone. It was ironic that he who hated the West should return there to die. But like a wild animal which knows when death is upon it, he was seeking a dark and lonely place where he could die in peace and in his own way. At this moment, no man in the railroad car looked stronger, more alive, more resolute. Yet the seed of death was in him, and the plant had but a little while to grow. There were 5 people in the car. The lights were dim. The passengers lay sprawled in uncomfortable sleep. The train rushed westward through the cold, clear night, carrying the man steadily toward his final destination. A very pretty young woman who had gotten at Santa Fe sat a few seats ahead of him and across the aisles. Further front, 3 men were seated, each traveling alone. Occasionally the conductor entered, accompanied by a blast of cold air. Several times he headed field to the cast iron stove. People interested Cattleman only as prospective antagonists, and of the men in the car only one seemed likely to fit the category. He was a straw-haired man with a lean and dangerous look, like a wolf among sheep. The girl was tall, gracefully slender, and her brown eyes had a way of looking directly at a man that was frank without boldness. Cattleman decided she was a girl who had been much around men, that she was used to them and liked them. Her name was Nancy Kerrigan. He overheard it when she was giving direction for package to be placed in the baggage car. The country outside was invisible. The window had seemed over, and the train moved as if through an endless tunnel. To Cattleman it did not matter, for he knew every foot of this roadbed and the surrounding country from descriptions which had come to his desk in New York. The high plains was broken at intervals with long ridges and outcropping of lava. In the mountains there was marketable timber. When he began planning his second disappearance, Cattleman had gone over all available reports and maps. They were climbing steadily. Ahead were high mesas, more lava, and occasional ruins. Soon the train would slow for a long, steep grade. When that time came, he would step off the train into the darkness. His destination was familiar only from a description given him 15 years ago over a campfire by a man who had often used the place for a hideout. When he left the train, he would return to the Abilene from which he had emerged 15 years earlier. Then James Cattleman would cease to exist, although actually he had ceased to exist a few days ago in Virginia. For the few weeks that remained to him, it would be nameless once more. To disappear the first time he had been relatively easy for the lanky, 17-year-old youngster he was then. No one noticed him when he came into the saloon at the crossing that night with Flint. It was not until the brief silence that followed the blasting of guns that their attention was drawn to him by the cocking of his gun. The men who killed Flint had scarcely seen the boy until that moment. But within the space of 5 seconds, 5 of them were shot dead, and 2 were dying. 2 more were wounded, but would live to carry the memory of that shocking 5 seconds to their graves. And in the darkness after the light had been shut out, the boy had carried Flint from the room. There was a doctor at an army post 20 miles away, but they were never to make it. Legend was born that night in Kansas, and the story of the massacre at the crossing was told and retold over many a campfire. Neither the man at the card table nor the youngster who carried him away was known, and both vanished as if the earth had opened to receive them. The events preceding the shooting provided only the information that 2 roughly dressed men had come in out of the night, and one bought chips on a poker game while the other dozed near the door. This was the youngster who upon that night was to shoot himself into Western history. The man at the table played a shrewd, intelligent game, and at the end of 2 hours he was winner by a small amount. The first indications of trouble came from the bar where a group of Texas trail drivers were drinking. The trail drivers had noticed the stranger playing cards, and after some whispering among them, they had drifted over together around the table. Suddenly, 2 of the trail's hands grabbed the stranger's arms, and one of the others said, "This man is a hired killer." Then 4 of the trail's drivers fired into his body. In the instance of silence that followed the shooting, they heard the click of a drawn-back gun hammer, and every head turned. "He was my friend," the youngster said, and he started shooting. Of the 5 killed in the first blast, 4 died from the headshots, all fired in the split seconds before somebody shut out the lights. Of the 2 survivors, neither would talk, but one of the dying men had whispered, "Flint." It was rumored that Flint was the name of an almost legendary killer who was occasionally hired by big cattle outfits or railroad companies. The train whistled, the lonely sound trailing off across the wind-swept plains. Cattleman got out his pipe and lighted it. His 2 bags and oversack were at the back of the car. When he opened the door, there would be a moment when he cold air might awaken the others, but he would be gone. Up to a point, he had planned every move, but once arrived at Flint's old hideout, there would be nothing to do but wait. Some time ago, his doctor told him he would not live a year, and most of that year had passed. He sat in what was called a parlor car, because of its elaborate lamp fixtured and narrow strips of mirror between the windows. In one of these he glimpsed himself. His face was lean and hard, triangular, with high cheekbones, green eyes, and strong jaw. His sideburns were long in the fashion of the time, his hair dark brown and curly. In the light it showed a tingle of red. His skin was dark, his features, except for his eyes, normally without expression. James Cattleman, financier and speculator, had often been called a handsome man. He had never been called a friendly one. In the 15 years since leaving Kansas, he had not been west of the Appalachians until now. There had been more than $1,500 in Flint's pockets when he died on that rain-soaked Kansas hillside, following the shooting at the crossing. The boy who was to become James Cattleman had $60 of his own, which he used to buy an outfit of store clothes in Kansas City. He traveled to New York and sold his 4 horses for an additional $400. With the stake he started in business. It was more money than either Jacob or Salt Sage had started with. The name Cattleman was a switch on Cattleman, a name invented for him by Flint when the boy entered school. He had never had a name of his own. The train whistled, and he got to his feet and stretched, the movement drawing the attention of the young woman. "It is some distance to Alamitos," she told him. When he smiled, his face lighted up. "It isn't the station one has to worry about," he said. "It's the side tracks." He caught her puzzled glance and smiled again. Strolling to the back of the car where he rubbed the stream from the window and looked out, seeing the scattered stars and grass bending before the wind. On the edge of the embankment there was snow. Nancy Kerrigan was disturbed by the comment. Yes, she thought of its truth. So many people became sidetracked and missed the things that were worthwhile. Maybe she herself was one of them. She glanced at the man again. He did not look like a Western man, yet he did. He was a striking man, but he looked lean and savage. James Cattleman returned to his seat and sat down. Another 10 minutes. In the 15 years following that night at the crossing, he had built his small stakes to many millions, making many enemies and no friends in the process. He married a wife who tried to have him killed, and he had no children. Now he was stepping out of the life as he had stepped into it, leaving nothing behind that mattered, nor would he take anything with him, not even a memory that he cared to keep. 3 years earlier, when he was 2 years old, he had been picked from the brush near a burned wagon train, where he had been overlooked by riding Comanches. There were no other survivors. Nothing remained to tell who he was, and those who found him had no interest in learning. During the next 4 years, he was handed around from family to family, and finally abandoned on a cold night in a one-street western town. Cattleman walked to the rear of the car again, glancing back at the occupants. All were asleep, or apparently asleep. The train was slowing for the long climb. Lifting his bags through the rear door, he closed it carefully behind him. The stars blinked coldly from an almost clear sky. The train whistled. The wind blew long across the high grass plains. He threw his bags to the roadbed and put a leg over the rail, hesitating one brief instant to look back into the dimly lighted car. This was the end of everything and the beginning of nothing. He put the other leg over the rail and dropped it to the roadbed. He stood watching the red lights on the back of the train, which moved away, scarcely faster than a man could walk, until it rounded a cove and left no more than a humming of the rails to tell of its passing, and the long whistle of the locomotive echoing down the night sky. The dry grass bent before the wind, and seed pods rattled into the brush along the right of way. James Cattleman was ended, and the man who had borne that name making it feared and respected. stood now where he had stood so many years before, without a name. He was now a man without a past, as he had been a boy without one. "Goodbye," he said, but there was nobody to say the world to, and nothing to remember. Slinging the haversack over his shoulder, he retrieved the two bags and climbing from the shallow cut where the track ran, he started off across the plain toward a high, comb-like ridge crested with trees. A sharp pain struck him suddenly, and he stopped abruptly, bending far over and retching violently. He dropped to his knees, caught by a sudden weakness, and remained there frightening at the agony. He had never known physical pain, although often hunger, and anything that robbed him of strength left him shaking, for strength was all he had. Now here, at the end, it ended. He needed it desperately. Later there would be more pain, but in the last days, his doctor had said, there would be less of it. Among the pines he searched for and found a hollow protected from the wind. He broke twigs from the lower trunks of the trees and built a small fire. He found a deadfall which he dragged near to use for a windbreak. With a razor-sharp bowie knife he cut limbs to hold the fire. He took a kettle from his gear and put on water for coffee. He changed into jeans, a wool shirt, and a sheepskin coat. He put on the flat-heeled hiking boots and got out his two pistols, one of which he belted on. The pistols were Smith & Wesson, 44 Russians, and the best gun built. He thrust the second gun into his waistband. Out of the long case he took a high-powered, custom-made rifle and assembled it, then a shotgun. He made a bed on pine boughs, spreading of thin ground sheet and blankets atop the boughs. He loaded the remaining clothing, food and ammunition into the big haversack. With his gear packed, the load weighed over 80 pounds. Then he vomited some soup and drank it, and the gnawing pain in his stomach subsided a little. He carried the two bags into the woods and buried them under some thick brush. A searching wind prowled the forest. Far off a faint call sounded and a shot. He listened, but the sound faded. From a few yards off in the brush, his fire was not visible, and he was pleased. He gathered more fuel, removed his boots, and crawled into his bed. Every move of his disappearance had been carefully prepared. Fortunately, he had dealt largely in cash and always kept large quantities of it available. Quietly, he transferred some funds, shifted stock from one company to another, and made arrangements to cover every need in case he should live longer than expected. On a trip to his Virginia farm, he consulted an attorney in Baltimore, a former Supreme Court judge. Drawing up a will, he followed it with a carefully prepared document for the management of his affairs. "I shall go away," he explained. "As I have learned, I have but a short time to live. If after 7 years I have not returned, I will naturally be declared legally dead, and my affairs can be settled. And if you die before that length of time, I want nothing done until after 7 years. As you will see, I have provided for my wife." "For a man of your means," the judge suggested, "it is very little." "This I have not mentioned it to anyone," nor do I want it mentioned, but last week in Saratoga, my wife tried to have me killed. My wife and her father. You will find the reports from the Pinkerton agency and my own statement among the papers in my safe deposit box. There is the voice. They would fight it, and I might not live long enough. Also, I believe they will try again to have me killed, for I have not told them how much I know, and her father desperately needs money for some financial manipulation of his own. He shuffled the papers together. I never had a family, sir, and knew little of women. I was a lonely man, and she made me very comfortable before we were married, and I suddenly began to want a home. I'm afraid I was very easy, he added, and I know now. Her father led her to marry me, hoping to get inside information on some of my activities. What they did not realize is that all my business I carry in my head. I never discuss business and keep no records where they can be seen. Returning to New York, he screened all his actions with care. He liquidated some more stocks, purchased several pieces of land, and bought suddenly and heavily in railroad shares. He deposited money where he would have access to it in case of need, and selected a name under which to receive mail if that should be necessary. Then he shifted to himself at 2 different addresses using this name, a box of books, and 2 other cases of various articles he might require. With the Baltimore attorney, he arranged a code name, a code for special dealings, and curtain transfers of property. He also wrote checks closing his various accounts on specified days following his disappearance. Announcing casually, as he often did, that he was going to Virginia for the shooting, he left New York. As his wife had never wanted to go anywhere with him, he was not surprised that she asked no questions. He had not told her that he knew of her plot to have him killed, and although they lived in the same house, they did not live together. Neither she nor her father had any idea of the sort of man with whom they were dealing. The killing was planned to occur during a card game. The man hired was a Mississippi riverboat gambler who was promised his freedom on appeal of self-defense. The gambler knew the story of the gunfight at the crossing, but there was nothing to connect the youngster of the shooting with the immaculate New York financier. The gambler received his first hint that all was not as he had expected during the early part of the game. Cattleman played thoroughly and with icy control, and the gambler quickly grasped that he himself was being studied with cool, calculated interest. As part of his scheme, the gambler deliberately invited an occasion of cheating whenever a showdown developed between Cattleman and himself. But Cattleman ignored the opportunity, and the gambler grew worried. Nothing was going as planned, and he began to realize that his opponent knew that he was trying to do, and was deliberately avoiding it. So one excuse was he to lead Cattleman into an argument that his mind was not on the game, and suddenly he lost a large pot. Startled, he looked at the table and realized that he himself had been cheated. With coolness and effrontery, he had been stripped of more than $6,000 with the skill of a professional. His eyes lifted to Cattleman's. "You have been looking for trouble," Cattleman quietly said. "I'm offering it to you." The gambler was nervous. He touched his tongue to his lips and felt the sweat breathing his forehead. "You are looking for trouble?" Cattleman said. "Why?" There was no one close by. "I'm going to kill you," the gambler said. If you wish to leave the game, we can drive the boat, and I will forget what you have said. It was there then, a way out. As a gambler, he knew he should take it, but gambling was only a part of his business, and he had his pride. I cannot. I have been paid. There are other ways to make a living, and you have chosen the wrong one. I am offering you your last chance. Get out. I have my word. I took their money. Gentleman had seemed almost negligent. When you are ready, then. The gambler stepped back quickly, overturning his chair. If you say I cheat, he said slowly, you're a liar, and he grasped his gun. Everybody saw him grasp the gun. Everybody saw him start to draw it. And then he started coughing, and there was blood on his shirt, blood dribbling down his chin, and on his face the realization of death. Cattleman leaned over him. He looked down at the gambler and knew this man was only a step away from the man he was himself. I didn't want to kill you, he said. Who hired you? Your wife, the gambler said, and her father. Cattleman realized that he had known something like this would happen. He started to rise, but the gambler caught his wrist. I must know who are you. Cattleman hesitated. For the first time since that night he spoke of it. I was that kid at the crossing. God. The gambler was excited. He started to rise, began to speak, and then he died. Cattleman turned away. I saw it, sir. The speaker was a man powerful in the state government. You had to do it. Seeing an acquaintance, Cattleman said, I am sorry for this. Will you say that he is buried well? I will pay. At the estate in Virginia, he wasted no time. He changed clothes, repacked his bags, and caught the ride with the peddler. He knew would be coming through. He also knew it would be months before the peddler came that way again. From a distant town, he took a stage, and then a train. By the time they discovered his absence, he would be safely in the hideout in New Mexico. It was very cold. He sat up in his blankets and put fuel on the fire. His thought returned to the girl on the train. She had been singularly self-possessed, with a quiet beauty not easily forgotten. Thinking of her made him remember his own wife, and he was amazed at how gullible he had been. His life had not fitted him for living with people. As a predatory creature, he had been successful. As a human being, he was a failure. He had invited no friendship and offered none. He had entered business as he had life, to fight with fang and claw. Cool, ruthless, intelligent, he subordinated everything to success, and confided in no one, prepared to protect himself at all times, and to always attack. He had moved swiftly, but with the sharp attention of a chess player, leaving nothing to chance. Nor had he ever attacked twice in the same way. He had developed an information service of officers' boys, messengers, waiters, cleaning women. They listened and reported to him, and he used the information. It was a time of gamblers, a period of financial manipulation when fortunes were made and lost overnight, meaning railroads and shipping, land speculation and industry. He had a hand in them all, shifting position quickly, negotiating behind the scenes, working 18 to 20 hours a day for days on end. There had been periods of vague, discreet, when the yearning within him reached out toward the warmth of others. But he fought down the impulse. shifting it. Occasionally, with subordinates or strangers, he had done some sudden, impulsive kindness, and was always ashamed of the lapse. Of his early years, he had only vague recollections. The one real thing in those years had been Flint. That he had been found beside the burned-out wagon train, he knew. There were vague recollections of a woman crying, and of a man and woman who be carried and drank constantly. She had been kind to him when sober, maudlin when drinking, and there were times when she forgot all about him, and he went hungry. When he was 4, he heard the shot that destroyed the only world he knew. He had gone into the next room, rubbing the sleep from his eyes, to find the woman rolling on the floor. He had often seen her like that, but this time there was blood on her back and side. Then people had come and taken him away. After that he lived 2 years on a dry farm, where there was little to eat and a losing battle was fought against big cattlemen. One day the farmers, fighting their own brutal struggle to survive, abandoned him on the street of a town. He was sitting there at daybreak, shivering with the long night's chill, when a cold-eyed man in a buffalo coat rode into town, went past him, then turned back. He remembered the cold grey eyes, the unshaven jaw, and the questions the man asked. He had answered directly and simply, the only way he knew. The man had leaned down and lifted him to the saddle, and down the street in an all-night saloon and stage station. The man bought him a bowl of a hot stew and crackers. He was sure he had never eaten anything that tasted so good. He had eaten, then fallen asleep. When he awakened, he was on the saddle in front of the man. They rode for several days, always by the lost traveled trails. The man took him to a house in the city and left him there with a woman. The next morning, Flint was gone. The woman was kind, and she took him to a school where he was admitted. He remained there for 8 years. The studies were hard. The other students complained often, but for the first time he slept in a decent bed and had regular meals. He dreaded the day when he might have to leave, and somehow he got the idea that if he failed as a student, he would be taken out of school. When he was 10, he made 2 discoveries at the same time. The first was the library, and the second was that the teachers at the school were curious about him. He found that by reading in the library he could anticipate lessons and find backgrounds for the essays the teachers constantly demanded. In this way he discovered the wonderful world of books. The other students came from wealthy or well-to-do homes, but his tuition came from a variety of western towns. He was asked many probing questions, but replied to none of them. During the long days of riding before they reached the house of the woman, Flint had taught him things that remained in his mind, and he now realized had shaped his entire life. Never let them know how you feel or what you are thinking. If they know how you feel, they know how to hurt you. And if they hurt you once, they will try it again. Don't trust anybody, not even me. To trust is a weakness. It ain't necessary that folks are bad, but they are weak or afraid. Be strong. Be your own man. Go your own way, but whatever you do, don't go crossways of other folks' beliefs. Keep your knowledge to yourself. Never offer information to anybody. Don't let people realize how much you know, and above all, study men. All your life there will be men who will try to keep you from getting where you're going, some out of hatred, some out of cussedness or inefficiency. When the day came that the headmaster sent for him, he fought down his panic. The headmaster was a severe, cold New England man. "We will be sorry to lose you," he said. "You have been an excellent student. As of now, you have a better education than many of our business and political leaders. Say that you use it." The headmaster paused briefly. "You came to us under peculiar circumstances recommended by people whom we respect. We know nothing of your family." For the boy, there had been no vacations. When others went to their homes, he had stayed at school, sitting for days alone in the library reading. "I would continue to read if I were you. Books are friends that will never fail you. You are going into Harvard. Remember this. Honor is most important than a good name. Keep your self-respect. You lack, I believe, an essential to happiness. You don't understand kindness." The headmaster shuffled papers on his desk. "I know that because I have never understood it myself, and it is a serious fault which I was long in appreciating. I hope it takes you less long." From his desk the headmaster took an envelope. "This was enclosed in the letter which terminated your schooling." Kettleman did not open the letter until he was alone. It was brief and to the point. "You was sitting on the street when I seen you, and you was hungry. I fed you. Figured a boy needed schooling, so I sent you. Every year, Pete. You are old enough to make out. I got nothing more for you. Come to Abilene if you want." 5 $20 bills were enclosed. He packed his clothes and, with nothing better to do, went to Abilene. There was no one there named Flint. After several days of inquiring, he met a botanist who gave him a careful look and then suggested he stick around. At school he had learned to ride, for it had been a school for young gentlemen. He got a job riding herd on some cattle, fattening for the market. It was not cow punching, just keeping the cattle from drifting. The others were cow hands, however, so he learned a good deal. After 3 months the cattle were sold. He went to work in a livery stable. He was there when Flint came. The wind moaned in the pines. He replenished the fire and lay back in his blankets again. The bolts bent above him. The fire crackled and far off a hoarse snow's drum. The coals glowed red and pulsing. Looking up through the pines, he could see a single star. He could be no more than 30 miles from Flint's hideout in the mail plains. He awakened sharply, every sense alert. He heard a distant shout, and then it replied so close he jumped from his blankets. "He can't be far, search the trees." Swiftly he drew on his boots and swung the gun belt around his slim hips, then struggled into the sheepskin. There was no time to eliminate signs of his precious ear, so he simply faded back into the deepest shadows, taking the shotgun with him. Brush crashed. A rider passed through, then another. "Hell, that ain't his fire!" "Hell, that ain't his fire! He had no time! Somebody waiting for him, maybe!" "Whatever it was," the second rider's voice was sharp with command, "had no business on this range, throw that bed on the fire." Kettleman stepped from the shadows, the shotgun ready in his hands. "The blankets are mine. Without taking his eyes from the riders, he threw a handful of brush on the fire, which blazed up. "And if you lays a hand on the bed, I will blow you out of your saddles." "Who the devil are you?" The older man's tone was harsh. "What are you doing here?" "Minding my own business. See that you do the same." "You're on my range. That makes your being here my business. Get off his range, and get off now." "Like hell." The man called Cattleman felt a hurt, bitter joy mounting within him. So he was going to die. Why die in bed when he could go out with a gun in his hand? He could shoot them all now and go as Flint had gone, in a blaze of gunfire. "When you say this is your range, you lie in your teeth. This is railroad land. Own it, deed it, and survey it. Now understand this. I don't give a damn who you are, and like it here. You can start shooting, and I will spread you all over the sandal." He felt the shock of his words hitting them, and knew they were taken aback as in their place he would have been by his fury. The fact that he held the shotgun on them at less than 20 paces was an added factor. "You're mighty sudden, friend." The man in comment held himself carefully aware, but he faced real trouble and sensing something irrational in the sharpness of the counter-attack. "Who are you?" "I am a man who likes his sleep, and you come hooting and hollering over the hills like a pack of crazy men. I take it you are hunting somebody, but with all that noise you're probably hidden so well you couldn't find him anyway. You act like a lot of brainless tenderfeet." "That's hard talk for a stranger." "There's nothing stranger about this shotgun. It can get almighty familiar. I've 20 men down below. What about them?" "Only 20? They make noise enough for 80. Why, I'd have a half dozen of them down before they knew what they were up against, and the rest of them would quit as soon as they knew you weren't around to pay them for fighting." A voice called through the trees. "Boss, are you all right?" "Tell them to go about their business," Cattleman said, "and then you do the same." The rider turned his head. "Beat it, Sam. I'll be along in a minute. Everything is all right." He turned back to Cattleman. "There's something here I don't understand. What are you doing here? What do you want?" "Not a damn thing. Not a single damn thing." The rider dismounted, then turned to his companion. "Bud, you ride along and help the others. I will meet you at White Milk." Bud hesitated. "It's all right, Bud. There will be no trouble with this man. Never tackle a man who doesn't care whether he lives or not. He will always have an edge on you." He was short, with square shoulders, premature gray hair, and he wore a mustache. His hard dark eyes studied Cattleman with care. Obviously puzzled, he glanced around the camp, seeking some clue. His eyes found the big game roughly. "That's quite a weapon. Must be hard to get ammunition, though." "I load my own." "I see." The rancher got out a cigar and lighted it. A man with a rifle like that, well, if he was a good enough shot, he could make himself a lot of money. Cattleman was bored. Daylight was not far off, and he badly needed rest. Talk of money irritated him. Anyway, he could buy this rancher and give him away, and never miss what it cost, and how much could it help him now? "My name is Nugent. I'm a cattleman." "All right." Nugent was accustomed to respect, and Cattleman's impatience injured him. One stripped the flames, and he added a few sticks. Poking at the fire gave him time to think. There had to be a reason for the man's prescience. No cowhand could afford such weapons. The rifle alone must have cost several $100s. You say something about this being railroad land? Nugent was fishing now, and Kettleman smiled to himself. Expert had tried to get information from him. He shrugged. At least half the land along any railroad right of way is railroad land, isn't it? Nugent was not satisfied. He had the suspicion that the man was amused by him, and such a thought was unbearable. It treated Nugent like an inferior. Nugent was not accustomed to being treated and did not like it. The flat-heeled boots did not go with cowhandry, and the man's clothing showed little wear. I never knew a man who did not want something. You're looking at one? Nugent got to his feet, and Kettleman arose too. I don't like a man who takes a crowd when he goes hunting. Really hungry, Nugent replied shortly. Even the law does it. You're not the law. I think a man who can't do his own hunting is a coward. Nugent's face went white, and with the effort fought down the urge to reach for a gun. But he was no gunfighter and knew it. My advice to you is to clear out. We don't take to heart talking strangers. Deliberately, Kettleman yawned. Get the hell out of here. I want to sleep. Unable to think of a reply that might not get him killed, Nugent walked to his horse and mounted. I will see you later, Nugent said when he was in the saddle. If I didn't have a squatter to chase, I'd. Squatter? Kettleman smiled at him. Why, you're only a squatter yourself. You don't own a foot of range. You came in here a few years ago and started running a few cattle, and that doesn't belong to you. Now of a sudden you're talking of squatters? You're a pompous little man with a bellyful of importance. Now get up of here. Blind with fury, Nugent wheeled his horse and rode away, spurring the animal madly. By the Almighty, he would get his hands and come back and... Something went over him like a dash of ice-cold rain. How did the stranger know all that? Who was he? Kettleman rolled his bed swiftly, slung his haversack and blanket roll, picking up his shotgun and rifle. He started along the ridge. It was still some time until daybreak, but if Nugent did come back, he had no desire to be caught sleeping, and the rancher was mad enough to gather his crew and return. Thomas Nugent, he knew the name from the files. Before building a railroad, they had made a study of ranchers in the area to gauge the amount of shipping there would be to handle their cattle and what supply they might require. There was not a ranch in the area about which he was uninformed. Because of the proximity to Flint's old hideout, he had paid particular attention to the vicinity. It was faintly gray in the east when he climbed out of the hollow and started across country. He was heavily loaded for the long walk that lay before him, but his illness seemed to have taken little toll of his strength as yet. He had always been strong, and even in New York he had been active, with regular workouts in the gun, a good bit of walking, and hunting trips to Virginia or over in New Jersey. He had been walking only a short distance when he found the haunted man.